It was supposed to be just another sunny day at Bike Week, Florida's massive annual gathering of motorcycle enthusiasts. But on March 8th, 2025, around 2 p.m., that peaceful afternoon shattered in an instant. At a racetrack gas station in New Smyrna Beach, the roar of engines gave way to chaos. Witnesses say dozens of bikers rolled in from two rival clubs, the Mongols and the Warlocks. Within moments, yelling turned into gunshots. Customers scrambled for cover, parents grabbed their children and ducked behind cars. What looked like a random gas station had turned into a war zone. No one knew it then, but this wasn't just a street fight. It was the spark that would set off one of the largest coordinated law enforcement crackdowns in Florida's recent history. What followed was swift, calculated, and massive. An undercover operation spanning 4 months, dozens of arrests, and a full-blown SWAT raid on the Mongols Clubhouse in Edgewater. They called it Operation Mongolian Beef, a name that sounds almost strange until you realize what was at stake. This wasn't just about bikes and leather vests. This was about power, turf, and making an example out of a group that had operated in the shadows for too long. In the next few minutes, we're going to take you inside that raid. We'll show you how a single outbreak of violence exposed a web of organized crime and how the full force of the law came crashing down on one of America's most notorious motorcycle gangs. The Florida Bike Week incident. Every March, thousands of bikers from across the country gather in Florida for Bike Week, a celebration of motorcycle culture that floods the streets with chrome, leather, and rumbling engines. But on March 8th, 2025, things took a violent turn no one saw coming. It started just like any other afternoon. The sun was out, the roads were packed, and the racetrack gas station on State Road 44 in New Smyrna Beach was buzzing with traffic. Around 2 p.m., a group of Warlocks pulled in, calm at first, just another cluster of bikers refueling and talking. Then, roughly 13 minutes later, members of the Mongols arrived. It wasn't a coincidence. Within seconds, tension ignited. Words were exchanged, voices rose, and then came the sound no one expected: gunfire. Witnesses reported several shots fired as both clubs clashed right in the middle of a public space. Panic spread instantly. Drivers sped off, some abandoning their vehicles. Families ran for cover, shielding their kids behind trash bins and fuel pumps. People in the area described it as something out of a movie: loud, fast, and terrifying. What made it worse was how suddenly it happened. There was no buildup, no warning. Just sudden violence between two outlaw motorcycle clubs, with a long history of tension. 2 men were shot. Both survived, but the scene left a mark on the community. Locals were outraged. Tourists were shaken. Law enforcement knew this wasn't just a random altercation. It was organized, pre-planned, intentional. This wasn't the first time these clubs had crossed paths. The Mongols and the Warlocks have had run-ins in the past, and every time they collide, blood seems to follow. What made this one different was the location. This happened in broad daylight, during a major public event, in front of families and children. That crossed a line. The shooting wasn't just a crime, it was a message, a show of force, a public display of control in a territory both clubs wanted to dominate. But this time, the message was heard by more than just rival bikers. It got the full attention of law enforcement at every level. Within hours, deputies were securing the area, gathering surveillance footage, and interviewing witnesses. Nearby traffic cameras, cell phone videos, and business security feeds gave investigators their first clear look at what really happened. They weren't just chasing suspects, they were building a case. And what started at a single gas station quickly turned into something much bigger. Authorities began connecting dots between known gang members, vehicles, and weapons. Patterns emerged, names resurfaced, and soon, what looked like a chaotic street brawl started revealing layers of coordination. They knew they weren't dealing with a spur-of-the-moment fight. This had signs of planning, right down to the timing, the location, and the individuals present. While the victims were rushed to the hospital and the scene was cleaned up, a deeper investigation was already underway, one that would stretch far beyond New Smyrna Beach. Because in that short window of violence, the Mongols had crossed a line the state wasn't going to ignore. The shooting didn't just disrupt Bike Week. It opened the door for one of the most aggressive criminal investigations Florida has seen in years. And it all began with a few seconds of gunfire at a gas station packed with tourists and families. What happened next would shake the Mongols to their core. They had made their move. Now the state was about to make theirs. Legal framework and aggravated rioting charge. The shooting at the gas station was horrifying on its own. But what came next was something Florida had never done before. In the days following the chaos, investigators weren't just focused on individual charges like assault or illegal firearm possession. They were preparing to use a much larger weapon. A relatively new state law designed specifically for situations like this. It's called aggravated rioting. Passed in recent years, the law was crafted to crack down on violent, organized unrest. Under this statute, if a riot involves more than 25 people, includes deadly weapons, causes property damage, or threatens public safety, especially near traffic or businesses, it becomes a second-degree felony. That means up to 15 years in prison and a fine of up to $10,000. This case fit that definition perfectly. Dozens of bikers, firearms, innocent people at risk, and a confrontation that happened in a public space with moving vehicles all around. For prosecutors, it was clear. This wasn't just a brawl. It was an organized act of violence, and it was time to make an example. For the first time, Florida authorities chose to charge members of a motorcycle club under this aggravated riot law. And not just a few. They filed charges against 28 suspected members of the Mongols who were directly tied to what happened that day. This wasn't a symbolic move, it was strategic. By using this law, prosecutors didn't need to prove who pulled the trigger. Just being part of the group involved, while carrying weapons and engaging in the violence, was enough to trigger the charge. It marked a turning point in how law enforcement responds to gang violence in Florida, not just with arrests, but with legal tools designed to take entire groups off the streets in one coordinated strike. The Mongols weren't just being hunted, they were being dismantled, legally, tactically, and publicly. Operation Mongolian Beef unfolds. Once the charges were filed, law enforcement launched a response that had been building quietly behind the scenes. They called it Operation Mongolian Beef, a strange name on the surface, but one that would soon become tied to one of the largest biker gang crackdowns in Florida's recent history. For nearly 4 months after the shooting at the gas station, investigators worked around the clock. What began as a localized case involving a few injured bikers quickly grew into a statewide, multi-agency investigation. As information poured in, authorities realized they weren't dealing with an isolated act of violence. This had the marks of something more calculated, something organized. Detectives collected surveillance footage from the gas station and nearby businesses. Cell phone videos from witnesses gave them clear visual evidence of who was there and what went down. From there, they followed leads through phone records, social media activity, and digital communications. What they found painted a clear picture. This was no street-level scuffle. It was a coordinated confrontation between rival clubs, likely over turf and retaliation. The group they focused on was the Mongols. Authorities learned that many of the members involved were not just present at the scene, but were also already tied to prior violent incidents across Florida. Some had past charges linked to shootings in Titusville and Cocoa. A few had prior federal records. Others were in the country illegally. What unified them wasn't just a shared patch. It was a pattern of organized criminal behavior. By the end of June, the net had been cast wide. Investigators had built files on dozens of individuals, tracing movements, weapons purchases, and affiliations. With all the pieces in place, they prepared to move. On July 2, 2025, the operation was set in motion. In a sweeping, coordinated effort, nearly 200 law enforcement personnel across Florida and beyond carried out a series of raids and arrests. These weren't random stops. Each target had been identified in advance, tracked, and monitored for weeks. When the time came, they struck all at once. 28 individuals tied to the Mongols were arrested that day. Most were picked up in Florida, in counties ranging from Volusia and Brevard to Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, and Polk. One was located out of state, in Chesterfield County, Virginia. The charges against them were serious, with each individual facing the newly applied aggravated rioting charge, along with related firearms or gang enhancement violations. In addition, 3 other suspects were named but had not yet been captured. Warrants were issued for their arrest, and the search for them continues. Search warrants were also executed across multiple properties, homes, storage units, and biker clubhouses. Officers seized a large cache of weapons, including 38 handguns and 15 long guns. Along with the firearms, they recovered gang vests, surveillance equipment, ammunition, digital evidence, and personal records. At the home of the Mongols Florida chapter president, officers recovered several weapons following a peaceful surrender. The operation was the result of collaboration between dozens of law enforcement agencies. Local departments worked side by side with federal units. The Volusia County Sheriff's Office was at the center of the operation, supported by the FBI through its field offices in Jacksonville, Tampa, Miami, Richmond, Newark, Columbia, and Charlotte. The U.S. Marshal Service was brought in to handle suspect tracking and arrests, while the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, Highway Patrol, and multiple state attorneys coordinated on the legal front. The level of precision was surgical. No steps were rushed, and every arrest was based on solid evidence. Authorities weren't just trying to remove a few dangerous individuals. They were strategically targeting the leadership and structure of the Mongols Florida chapter. By hitting them at every level, from enforcers to planners to decision makers, the operation aimed to cripple the club's presence in the state entirely. Sheriff Mike Chitwood later described the operation as a textbook example of modern law enforcement working together. He emphasized that this wasn't just about making arrests, it was about setting a precedent. When violence spills out into the public and threatens everyday people, it will be met with overwhelming response. And that response won't be temporary. It will be organized, deliberate, and unrelenting. What made Operation Mongolian Beef different wasn't just its size, it was its method. Law enforcement didn't rush in with vague suspicions. They built their case slowly, documenting each move, connecting every suspect to a timeline of events. By using the aggravated riot law, they didn't have to prove who fired each shot. Just being there, armed and acting as part of the group, was enough. That approach allowed prosecutors to charge nearly the entire group, effectively wiping out a large part of the Mongols network in Florida. In the end, the results were undeniable. An entire chapter of a nationally recognized outlaw motorcycle club had been pulled off the streets in one day. Their weapons were confiscated, their clubhouse was raided, their communication lines were broken, and most importantly, their illusion of control was shattered. But law enforcement wasn't finished. With suspects still at large and investigations continuing, the impact of Operation Mongolian Beef was far from over. The Edgewater Clubhouse and SWAT raid. While arrests were happening across Florida, one location stood out above the rest, the Mongols Clubhouse in Edgewater. To anyone passing by, it looked like a typical commercial property. But behind the doors, authorities believed it served as a central hub for the group's local operations. For months, investigators had monitored the building discreetly. They documented patterns, comings and goings, vesicles, and meetings. Everything pointed to it being far more than just a hangout spot. As part of Operation Mongolian Beef, the Edgewater Clubhouse became a key target. Law enforcement wasn't just looking to arrest people, they wanted to send a message by hitting the Mongols where it mattered most, their home base. In the early hours of July 2nd, as other arrests were unfolding, a specialized SWAT team was mobilized. Officers approached the clubhouse with caution. They had intelligence suggesting that weapons could be inside, and they weren't taking any chances. The operation was planned down to the minute. No sirens, no warning. Just a fast, coordinated entry designed to take control without giving anyone time to react. The team moved in quickly, breaching the property and securing it in a matter of minutes. No gunfire was exchanged and no injuries occurred. The building was cleared room by room. Officers seized what they came for: documents, electronics, and additional gang-related materials. The operation at the Edgewater site was over almost as soon as it began, but its effect rippled out far beyond the building itself. For years, this clubhouse had stood as a physical symbol of the Mongols' presence in the region. It hosted meetings, parties, and gatherings, some public, many not. Locals had always been aware of it, but most kept their distance. After the shooting during Bike Week, the pressure to act on that location grew. Authorities believed that decisions made inside those walls played a direct role in the gas station shooting weeks earlier. The raid sent a clear message: no clubhouse, no matter how established, was off limits. Simultaneously, officers served multiple search warrants at homes belonging to known Mongols members, including the residence of the Florida chapter president. Though he surrendered peacefully, the search of his home turned up several firearms and potential evidence linking him to the planning of the Bike Week clash. Other homes in Volusia, Brevard, Miami-Dade, and Polk counties were also searched. At each location, law enforcement recovered weapons, gang-related items, and materials that investigators said supported their case for a broader criminal conspiracy. Coordinating these raids wasn't easy. They involved dozens of officers, precise timing, and reliable intelligence. But the result was undeniable. The Mongols had been removed from their stronghold, and their main base in Edgewater had been stripped of its power. What followed was just as important as the raid itself. Local authorities didn't allow the clubhouse to sit untouched. They began legal proceedings to seize the property, arguing that it had been used in the planning and support of organized criminal activity. If successful, it would mean the Mongols couldn't reclaim the space or use it to regroup. Residents of Edgewater responded with a mix of relief and curiosity. For years, the clubhouse had been an uncomfortable presence in their town. After the raid, some felt a sense of closure, while others remained wary, knowing that removing one location didn't necessarily erase the influence of a group like the Mongols. But law enforcement was clear. This was just one part of a broader plan. Taking the clubhouse was a symbolic blow, and a legal one. It meant that the organization's structure wasn't just being dismantled through arrests, but through the physical removal of its assets and base of operations. With the Edgewater clubhouse cleared and dozens of members in custody, the Mongols' presence in Florida was shaken to its core. The message had been delivered in force and without hesitation. Key figures and arrested members. As the dust settled from the statewide raids, attention turned to the people behind the patches. Those arrested during Operation Mongolian Beef weren't just foot soldiers. Among the 28 arrested were some of the Mongols' most active and influential figures in Florida's biker network. One of the most prominent names was Carlos Cardona Batista, identified as the Florida chapter president of the Mongols. His role was central, not only as a leader, but as someone authorities believed helped coordinate club activity, including the violent confrontation during Bike Week. Cardona Batista surrendered peacefully when law enforcement arrived at his home. Inside, officers recovered several firearms and materials that investigators claimed supported his leadership role in the incident. Other high-ranking members were also taken into custody. While many of the names haven't been publicly disclosed due to the ongoing nature of the investigation, several of those arrested were considered club officers or enforcers, individuals tasked with carrying out orders, collecting dues, recruiting new members, and maintaining discipline within the ranks. Many of those arrested were already known to law enforcement. Some had extensive criminal histories involving weapons, drugs, and past violent crimes. Others were reportedly undocumented and had ties to prior gang-related incidents in Central Florida. The collection of suspects was not random. It represented a targeted removal of the club's operational backbone in the state. One of the more disturbing patterns uncovered during the investigation was that several of these individuals had also been linked to previous shootings in Florida. Authorities traced some of them to violent events in Titusville and Cocoa, suggesting that the Bike Week shooting wasn't an isolated moment, but rather part of an ongoing pattern of criminal behavior tied to turf wars and retaliation. 3 additional individuals named in arrest warrants remained at large following the July 2nd sweep. Law enforcement has not released their names publicly, but they are believed to be connected to either the planning or execution of the gas station attack. Officers continue to track them, warning that they may be armed and should be considered dangerous. The legal approach in these arrests was strategic. Rather than pursuing only those seen firing weapons, prosecutors applied the aggravated riot statute, meaning that any individual who participated, coordinated, or encouraged the violence, even if they didn't fire a shot, could face serious prison time. That widened the scope of prosecution significantly. and allowed authorities to go after individuals based on their roles within the group, not just their actions at the scene. As the arrested members began appearing in court, prosecutors pushed for high bonds and strict conditions, arguing that many of them posed a continued risk to public safety. Judges agreed in several cases, citing the use of deadly weapons, the danger posed to bystanders, and the organized nature of the violence. For the Mongols, this wave of arrests was more than a legal issue. It was a major blow to their public image and their internal structure. Losing a president and key officers in one day disrupted communications and left the chapter scrambling. Meanwhile, law enforcement made it clear this was not the end, and more arrests could follow as investigations continue. The message was simple: if you're involved, you're accountable. And in this case, the accountability came fast, hard, and statewide. Broader context: Mongols, MC, and their history. To truly understand the weight of what happened in Florida, you have to know who the Mongols really are and what they've represented for decades. The Mongols Motorcycle Club was founded in 1969 in Montebello, California, originally formed by a group of Hispanic Vietnam veterans who were denied membership in other outlaw biker clubs, most notably the Hells Angels. What began as a small group quickly grew into a national organization, expanding across the western United States and eventually reaching the East Coast and even internationally. While the Mongols often present themselves publicly as a brotherhood of motorcycle enthusiasts, law enforcement agencies at every level see something very different. Over the years, the Mongols have developed a reputation for violence, drug trafficking, illegal firearms sales, extortion, and organized crime. The FBI classifies them as an outlaw motorcycle gang and has conducted multiple long-term investigations into their activities. Perhaps their most infamous rival is the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. The two groups have had a bitter and bloody history marked by shootings, stabbings, and bar brawls across the country. Their feud has led to numerous public confrontations, some resulting in multiple fatalities. But in Florida, the Mongols have also clashed with another group, the Warlocks, which is what helped fuel the violence during Bike Week 2025. One of the Mongols' largest takedowns before Florida was Operation Black Rain in 2008. That federal sting operation led to dozens of arrests, including high-ranking national members. Agents infiltrated the gang, collected evidence over a long period, and then executed one of the most coordinated raids against an outlaw biker group at the time. The operation even attempted to strip the club of its trademarked logo, a move that sparked a years-long legal battle. Despite these efforts, the Mongols survived and adapted. Their decentralized structure and expansion into multiple states made it difficult to remove them completely. Florida was one of their more recent strongholds, and by 2025, the group had gained enough influence to carry out bold, public actions like the one during Bike Week. That's why Operation Mongolian Beef wasn't just another case. It was seen as a major step in pushing back against a group that had, for years, operated in plain sight. For law enforcement, this wasn't just about punishing individuals. It was about weakening an organization with a long, violent history. And while the Florida chapter has now been disrupted, the broader Mongols network still exists. The question that remains is how far they'll go to regain their footing, and how prepared law enforcement will be to stop them the next time they strike. What it means and what's next. The events surrounding the Bike Week shooting and the Edgewater Clubhouse raid didn't just lead to arrests. They exposed a larger truth about how deeply organized motorcycle gangs like the Mongols have embedded themselves into parts of American life. For years, these clubs operated behind a wall of loyalty, fear, and silence. But the daylight gunfight at a busy gas station shattered that illusion. It showed that their conflicts weren't just internal power struggles. They were playing out in public, around families, tourists, and innocent bystanders. Operation Mongolian Beef was more than a law enforcement response. It was a direct message to every gang in Florida and beyond. If you bring violence to the streets, especially in broad daylight, you'll face an overwhelming and organized crackdown. And for the first time, Florida used its aggravated rioting laws to hold not just the trigger pullers accountable, but anyone who took part in the violence, leaders, planners, and members alike. In just one day, an entire chapter's leadership was brought down. Weapons were seized, Clubhouses were raided, and the courts were flooded with felony charges that could lock these individuals away for years. But the work isn't done. 3 suspects are still at large. Prosecutors continue to comb through digital evidence, looking for more connections, more accomplices, and more ways to dismantle the network piece by piece. Law enforcement has promised continued pressure, not just on the Mongols, but on any group that threatens public safety through organized violence. So, what does this all mean? It means the rules have changed. What once stayed in the shadows is now being dragged into the light. The next time rival gangs think about making a move, they'll have to remember what happened here. How a single outbreak of gunfire triggered a statewide manhunt, a coordinated raid, and the collapse of one of Florida's most dangerous biker factions. And that might just be the beginning.